What happens after we die? Is there any part of us that lives on?
I remember 1 minute being in this world, and the next minute being like, I died.
All of a sudden, I feel like life was sort of returned to me, meaning that I understood how sacred it is.
There was a welcoming voice that said, because you are my child. This is your home. Welcome home.
There are no shortage of skeptics.
Nothing. You're just nothing. You're just gone. That's it.
We have brains. It's brains that do the thinking. Our brains are going to decay. That'll be that.
Some of the most compelling clues to this question can be found in near-death experiences, where people find themselves brought to the brink of death, and yet somehow they come back with amazingly detailed visions of another world, profoundly changing them in ways we can't explain.
And many of them have reported, actually, anecdotally, that they've been able to see and hear things going on, even though from our perspective they should have been dead and their brain should not be functioning at all.
Their experiences are remarkably similar. Many of them describe things like being outside of their bodies and being outside of time, seeing their whole lives flash in front of them in a life review, meeting lost loved ones and celestial beings, overwhelming them with a sense of joy and unconditional love. And they're not new. One of the earliest known descriptions can be found in Plato's Myth of written around 380 BC, which includes an account of the soul's journey through the afterlife. And they can happen to anyone. Even atheists have reported having near-death experiences.
We have lots of examples of people who are atheists who have no belief in a deity or in an afterlife who have the same type of profound near-death experiences everyone else does.
Dr. Bruce Greyson is a psychiatrist and a professor emeritus of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia. He co-founded the International Association for Near-Death Studies, reviewing more than 1,000 near-death experiences. Dr. Greyson is widely considered to be one of the leading researchers in this area, and in his work, he's found common patterns and universal themes that go far beyond culture. He presents his fascinating insights in his book, After. A doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. One of these cases comes from a 33-year-old man named Tom Sawyer. Not that Tom Sawyer. This Tom was working underneath a truck one day when the ground shifted and everything came crashing down on him in a terrifying accident. From that moment, everything seemed to happen in extreme slow motion. Suddenly, he relived all the events of his life, from the moment he took his first breath, right up until his accident with the truck. In a flash, he was brought back to his childhood home, and he was 8 years old again. His father was telling him to mow the lawn and to cut the weeds in the yard. Somehow, this exact moment from his past was happening again, with every single detail. The temperature of the air, the sights, and the smells were all the same. Even the number of mosquitoes flying in the yard all became so crystal clear that he could have counted them. He saw himself mowing the lawn from straight above, in a panoramic view that was hundreds of feet high, as if he were looking down through a camera. What's astonishing about Tom's experience is that he relived these events not only through his own eyes, but through the eyes of other people. He describes a moment in his life when he was 19 years old. He was driving his pickup truck, and an angry man darted into the road and almost ran into it. Tom shouted at him, "Hey, next time, use the crosswalk." The man ran towards Tom in a rage. He reached into the window and slapped Tom across the face with his open hand. Tom stepped out of his truck filled with adrenaline, and he hit the man over and over again. As the man fell to the ground, Tom looked up to see a group of people now standing around him, watching the fight unfold. Tom looked at them and said, "You all saw him hit me first." And then he got back in his truck and he drove away. But now, when Tom relived this moment in his life review, somehow he was able to feel everything that the other man experienced through his own eyes. This time, he realized that the man had been drinking heavily. He was grieving the loss of his wife, who'd recently died. Tom saw this man sitting alone at a stool at the bar, where he'd paid for his drinks. He saw the man leave and watched him running into the road, into the path of Tom's truck. And this time, seeing this moment again, Tom felt everything from the other side. The anger, the embarrassment, and the physical pain that this man felt as Tom was hitting him. Everything about that experience between Tom and that man connected them inextricably, and it was so incredibly vivid and real. Tom says that I was in that man's eyes, and I watched everything without judgment and without negativity. I experienced it all with the unconditional love of the divine, as if it were through the eyes of God, or whatever you want to call it, a spiritual and divine being. I wish I could tell you how it really felt, but I could never explain it accurately through words. This sense that it's impossible to capture the true nature of near-death experiences through language is another common theme in people who've had them. It would be like trying to draw the taste of ice cream with crayons to explain it to someone who's never tasted ice cream before. And Tom isn't the only one. Many people who've had near-death experiences come back with a powerful realization that all of us form part of the divine. The author Anita Moorjani describes her own near-death experience as a feeling of total clarity, a sense that at our core, we all come from one unity. And while our lives might seem separate and isolated, there's an underlying connectedness between us. And at the end of our lives, when we leave this physical world, we return to that same sense of wholeness. Some might call it God or Source or Brahman, but whatever name you give it, it's the same, a single unitary state of oneness, and it feels like coming home. Skeptics tend to dismiss these experiences as wishful thinking or as hallucinations caused by chemical changes in the brain. But for Dr. Greyson, who was himself a skeptic, he points out that there are cases you can't dismiss so easily. One of these cases is the story of Jack Bybee, who went to the hospital with severe pneumonia when he was 26 years old. During his time there, Jack had a nurse, a woman named Anita. She would do her rounds in the hospital and fluff the pillows in Jack's room. They got to know each other, and one day, Nurse Anita told Jack that she was going away for the long weekend to celebrate her 21st birthday with her parents. Jack held her hand to wish her a happy birthday, and then she left. But then a little while later, Jack suddenly stopped breathing. Medical staff rushed into his room to try to revive him, but he became unconscious. Jack had a near-death experience where he found himself in another world, in a beautiful pasture, under a wide-open sky, feeling completely at peace. Suddenly, he saw Nurse Anita standing next to him, which surprised him. "Anita, what are you doing here?"
"I came by to check up on you, to make sure you're all right. But Jack, you must return. Tell my parents I'm sorry I wrecked the red MGB. Tell them I love them."
Anita went over a beautiful green valley where there was a fence, and she said to Jack,
"There's a garden on the other side, but you can't see it now. You have to go back while I continue through the gate."
And just as suddenly, she was gone. Jack woke up in his hospital bed, and he saw that a new nurse was helping him. Jack told her the astonishing things he'd just seen, and the nurse burst into tears and ran out of the ward. Jack would later learn that this nurse had been close friends with Anita. As it turns out, that weekend, Anita's parents surprised her with a red MGB sports car, which thrilled her. She drove the car down the highway, lost control of it, and crashed into a concrete telephone pole, ending her life. Jack was absolutely stunned by this. What's remarkable about this case is that, unlike other near-death experiencers who reunite with deceased loved ones knowing that their loved ones have already died, Jack had no idea that Anita had passed on. He had no way of knowing any of the details of her car accident. And what's more, he's not the only one with a story like this. There are others who've met people during near-death experiences who were not known to have died. Counseling professor Jan Holden, who reviewed 93 reports of out-of-body perceptions that took place during near-death experiences, found that 92% of their accounts were completely accurate. If these were really hallucinations like skeptics say they are, then how do we explain such high rates of accuracy? To answer this, we have to consider a very different view of the brain than we're usually taught, one that goes to the very heart of who we are and the nature of consciousness itself. What's the difference between the mind and the brain? Traditionally, we think of the mind as the sum total of all your conscious thoughts, feelings, and memories. It's the complete awareness you have of who you are and the world around you. But your brain, on the other hand, is a physical object. It's a collection of pink-gray matter and tissue that sits inside the skull. If you believe in the materialist story of the mind, then consciousness is something that gradually evolved out of matter, from single-celled organisms to complex animals, and eventually humans. Materialists believe that consciousness comes out of chemical and biological processes inside the brain, and so everything about who you are, your dreams, your hopes, and your emotions, all of it is located somewhere within the structure of your brain. And so, When the brain dies, everything about who you are dies along with it. But is this really true? Materialists tend to believe this because they point to a relationship between the mind and brain functions. For example, studies show that if you were to damage certain brain areas, like the occipital lobe, which is responsible for processing vision, then you wouldn't be able to see anymore, even if your eyes were working perfectly fine. This association between the mind and the brain is a scientific fact. But here's the problem. The interpretation that the brain creates the mind is not a scientific fact. It's just one possible theory used to explain the relationship we find between them. We can see this in cases where people have had near-death experiences even after they've been found to be clinically dead, where there's no detectable electrical activity in the brain. Dr. Greyson writes that out of all the people who survive these situations, most don't have any memories about what happened to them between the time they were unconscious and the time they were revived. And yet, around 20% of them will have near-death experiences where they give incredibly vivid and detailed accounts of the afterlife, even though our scientific understanding of the brain tells us that they shouldn't have been able to perceive anything at all. If the brain really creates consciousness, then near-death experiences that happen when the brain is shut down should be impossible. So how do we explain what's happening? One clue to this question can be found in the story of Steve Luiting. Steve was swimming in a lake on a beautiful sunny day when he was 8 years old. Without realizing it, he was getting a serious sunburn as he swam in the water. When he got up and dove into the lake, he instantly felt the waves crashing hard against his sunburned back. He felt a sharp pain that knocked the breath out of his lungs. Unable to move, he began to sink deeper and deeper into the water. Everything felt cold, and then a part of him realized that he was about to die. You might expect an 8-year-old to panic in a situation like this, but Steve describes an astonishing shift in his mind as his near-death experience began to take hold. I seemed to change points of view, as if I was changing location in a room. One moment, I was a terrified child, but in another moment, I was a calm person watching the terrified one. I both was and yet wasn't. My mind suddenly expanded to an adult capacity, and then beyond. Without the limitation of a child's brain, my true nature began to express itself. It made me think that our understanding of the brain is actually backwards. It's not that the brain creates consciousness, it's that the brain filters our experiences, focusing it and narrowing it to give us a sense of being in the physical world. Dr. Greyson uses an analogy. Think of the brain like a radio receiver that can pick up on many different frequencies, but tunes in only to the signal of the channel it wants to listen to. It does that by blocking out every other frequency. If it didn't do that, our ears would be overwhelmed trying to listen to hundreds of radio stations all at the same time, which would make it impossible to hear any of them clearly. That's essentially what the brain does. It tunes in only to the perceptions and to the information that it needs to survive in the physical world. This might seem like a wild idea, but is it really that far-fetched? Because we already know that the brain acts as a filter in many ways. For example, when you're sitting in your kitchen, even if it seems quiet, there's a ton of ambient sound happening all around you. The hum of the refrigerator, the electrical fan on your computer, or the noise from the traffic outside. But once you've been in the room for a while, your brain tunes out all of these noises and the low-level sounds fade away, so you can focus your attention on the things that are more important. You don't even notice your brain is doing this. But if you recorded the sounds of your kitchen with a microphone, it would pick up all of these noises in detail. And so, while the materialist view is that the brain is primary in creating consciousness, more and more people are beginning to wonder, what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness is what's primary, and our brains act as a filter to create a limited sense of human perception as we go about our everyday lives? This idea isn't new. The French philosopher Henri Bergson said that the brain maintains consciousness fixed on the world in which we live. It is the organ of attention to life. Implied in this is the idea that the brain doesn't create the mind. The brain is a receiver of thoughts from your mind, choosing only the ones that are important for your physical survival, and then converting them into chemical and biological signals that your body can understand. Most of the time, the brain works just fine, but when it begins to break down, like in near-death experiences, it's only then that we realize that there's a mind outside of the brain, a wider consciousness that's hugely expansive. And suddenly we can access the very things that people describe when they're on the brink of dying, like seeing deceased loved ones, meeting guides, or visiting other worlds. our minds open up to the oneness of the universe. It just so happens that this expanded consciousness doesn't help us survive in the physical world, and it might even get in the way, and so the brain filters it, blocking out all the information it doesn't need, creating the illusion that we're isolated and separate from each other. Dr. Greyson says that we find support for this in psychedelic studies. Neuroimaging experiments show that when people take psychedelics and have elaborate mystical experiences, their brains actually show decreased activity. This is exactly the opposite of what you'd expect if you believe that psychedelics trigger hallucinations in the brain. But on the other hand, it makes perfect sense if you consider the filtering theory of the brain. Because in theory, psychedelics may reduce the brain's filtering function in much the same way that near-death experiences do, opening up our consciousness to all sorts of spiritual insights. If this is what's happening, then it also explains why so many ancient traditions all around the world have long used techniques like breath holding and sensory deprivation to induce mystical experiences and to commune with the divine. All of these things may be reducing the brain's filter, enabling us to access higher levels of consciousness. And the mysteries don't end there. In the next video, we'll look at one of the most astonishing real-life accounts of near-death experience. He shouldn't have been able to perceive anything at all, and yet somehow he survived and came back with incredible visions of the afterlife. Once this video is available, you'll see it appearing on the left side of the screen. And let me know, what do you think about all this? Have you or someone you've known had a near-death experience? I'd love to read about it in the comments. And if you like this video, please show your support by pressing the like button. As always, thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.